The night my daughter laughed at me in front of her friends, calling my life quiet to the point of meaningless, I almost told her the truth. Almost told her that while she was measuring success in titles and salaries, I had been quietly changing lives she would never even notice. Instead, I just smiled and let her believe I was small. What she didn't know was that the very week she said I did nothing, my work had just helped over 3,000 families put food on their tables. And soon, she would be one of them. If this story touches you even a little, I'd love for you to like and subscribe. It truly helps more than you think. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from and what time is it there right now? I always read them, and I'd love to hear your story too. People like my daughter Olivia think they understand what a small life looks like. To her, it's a quiet house at the edge of a sleepy Illinois town. It's a woman who wakes up before sunrise, not because she has to, but because she doesn't know what else to do with her time. It's someone who shops at the same grocery store every week, waves at the same neighbors, and spends evenings alone with a cup of tea and an old armchair that creaks a little too loudly. To Olivia, that woman is me. My name is Alexander Bradford, and for the past 12 years, I've lived alone in the same modest house my husband and I bought when we still believed life would always be predictable. Back when Thomas was alive, this place was filled with noise, his laughter, Olivia's teenage arguments, the clatter of dishes during Sunday dinners. Now the loudest sound most days is the ticking of the clock in the hallway. I suppose from the outside, Olivia isn't wrong. My life does look quiet, but quiet doesn't mean empty. It never has. Olivia doesn't see that. She sees what she wants to see. She sees me standing in the kitchen when she visits wearing the same soft cardigan I've had for years, asking if she's eaten enough, if she's sleeping well, if she's taking care of herself. She sees someone who hasn't moved on with the world. Someone who didn't chase a second career or travel the globe or reinvent herself after retirement. Olivia lives in Chicago now in a high-rise apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view that probably costs more than this entire house. She works as a marketing director for a tech company, fast-paced, high-pressure, always on the phone, always chasing the next big opportunity. She thrives in that world. I used to admire it. I still do in some ways, but somewhere along the way, admiration turned into distance, and distance turned into judgment. It didn't happen overnight. When Olivia was little, she used to sit beside me on the couch and hold my hand while we watched old movies. She would tell me everything about school, her friends, her dreams. Back then, I was her whole world. I remember one night in particular. She must have been about 8 years old. She had just come home from school upset because someone told her she wasn't cool enough to sit at their table. She climbed into my lap and said, "Mom, will you always think I'm enough?" I kissed her forehead and told her, "You will always be more than enough." She believed me. For a long time, she believed me. But life has a way of rewriting what we once held as truth. As Olivia grew older, the world began to shape her in ways I couldn't control. Success became her language. Achievement became her identity. And slowly, almost without either of us noticing, the girl who once asked if she was enough became a woman who measured worth in numbers, salary figures, job titles, social circles. And in that world, I didn't fit. At first, it was small things. She'd visit less often. When she did, she was always distracted, checking her phone, answering emails, stepping outside to take calls. Then came the comments. "They're offering early retirement packages now, Mom. You could have done something more with your time." Or, "Have you ever thought about moving somewhere more active? You know, somewhere with people your age doing things?" I would smile and nod the way mothers do when they choose peace over confrontation. "I like it here," I would say gently. She would sigh like I had just admitted to giving up on life. "You deserve more than this," she'd insist. But what she really meant was, she deserved a mother who looked more impressive when she talked about me. The gap between us widened with every visit, and yet I never pushed back. Not because I agreed with her, but because I understood something she didn't. Sometimes people only see the surface because they're not ready to understand what lies beneath. One Sunday afternoon, Olivia invited me to her apartment in Chicago. She said it casually over the phone like it was an afterthought. "I'm having a few people over. Nothing big. You should come. It'll be good for you to get out." I hesitated, not because I didn't want to see her, but because I knew what a few people meant in Olivia's world. It meant colleagues, friends who spoke in quick, confident tones, people who sized each other up within minutes of meeting. Still, I said yes. I always say yes when it comes to Olivia. The drive into the city took just over 2 hours. Traffic was heavier than usual, and by the time I arrived, the sun had already begun to dip behind the skyline, casting long shadows between the buildings. Her apartment was just as I remembered, sleek, modern, almost too perfect. Everything had its place. Everything looked like it belonged in a magazine. It didn't feel like a home. It felt like a statement. Olivia greeted me at the door with a quick hug, already half turned toward the living room, where voices and laughter spilled into the hallway. "Mom, you made it. Come in." There was no warmth in her voice, just efficiency. Inside, I counted at least 8 people, well-dressed, polished. They carried themselves with the kind of confidence that comes from always being in control. Olivia moved through the room effortlessly, introducing me as she went. "This is my mom, Alexander. Not my mother who raised me, not the woman who gave me everything. Just Alexander." Like I was a distant acquaintance. I smiled politely, shaking hands, nodding, as people greeted me. Most of them were kind enough in that distant, polite way strangers often are. But I could feel it, the unspoken question lingering in the room. What does she do? Who is she? And Olivia? She answered it before anyone could ask. "Oh, she's retired," she said lightly, taking a sip of her drink. "She lives out in the suburbs. Very quiet life." There was a pause. Then someone chuckled softly. "Sounds relaxing," a man said. Olivia shrugged. "If you're into that kind of thing." The conversation moved on quickly after that, but something had already shifted. I stood there holding a glass of water I hadn't touched, and for the first time in a long time, I felt small. Not because of what they thought, but because of how easily my daughter had reduced my entire life to something insignificant. I didn't say anything. I never do. But that night, as I stood in that room full of strangers listening to Olivia laugh, I realized something important. She didn't just misunderstand my life. She had already decided it had no value. I wish I could tell you that night ended quietly, that I finished my glass of water, hugged my daughter goodbye, and drove home without letting it touch me. But the truth is, that was the night something inside me cracked. It happened about an hour after I arrived. The conversation had shifted from polite introductions to louder laughter stories about work and the kind of casual competition people don't even realize they're engaging in. Who closed the biggest deal? Who got promoted faster? Who was flying where next? I stayed near the edge of the room, listening more than speaking. I've always been that way. Even when I was younger, I preferred to observe. There's something revealing about what people say when they forget they're being watched. Olivia thrived in that space. She stood near the center of the room, glass in hand, her posture confident, her voice animated. People leaned in when she spoke. They admired her. I could see it clearly. And I was proud of her. Even then, I was proud. But pride can exist at the same time as pain. At some point, the conversation turned subtly at first toward family. A woman named Rachel, one of Olivia's colleagues, was talking about her parents moving closer to the city. "They finally sold the house," she said. "Honestly, I think it's better for them. more stimulating. Someone laughed softly. Yeah, my dad would lose his mind if he had nothing to do. And then, almost like it was inevitable, all eyes turned just slightly toward Olivia. And what about your mom? Rachel asked. Does she still live out in the suburbs? I felt it before Olivia even spoke. That small shift in energy. That pause that stretches just long enough to make you aware something is coming. Olivia smiled. That same polished smile she uses in meetings, the one that's just warm enough to be likable, but controlled enough to reveal nothing real. Oh, she does, she said. Same house, same routine. Honestly, I don't think anything's changed for her in years. There were a few nods. Someone said, "That must be peaceful." Olivia let out a small laugh. Peaceful, if you like doing nothing. The words landed softly in the air, but they didn't feel soft. They felt sharp. I saw Rachel glance at me just for a second, like she wasn't sure how I'd react. I kept my expression steady. Years of being a mother teaches you how to hold your face still, even when your heart isn't. Olivia continued, not noticing or not caring. I keep telling her she should get involved in something. Volunteer travel, take classes, anything. But she's just comfortable. Comfortable. It's funny how that word can sound like an accusation. Someone chuckled again, a little louder this time. I mean, some people just don't have that drive, a man said, shrugging. And Olivia nodded. Exactly. That was the moment. Not the first comment, not even the laughter, but that agreement, that quiet, final confirmation that in her world I had already been categorized, filed away as someone who had stopped mattering. I don't remember deciding to move, but suddenly I found myself stepping forward just enough to be included in the circle. Olivia, I said gently. My voice wasn't loud, but it was enough to shift their attention. She turned to me, surprised. Yes, Mom. There was a flicker of impatience there. Not hostility, just inconvenience, like I had interrupted something important. I'm glad you invited me, I said. It wasn't what anyone expected me to say. The tension eased just slightly, like they thought this was going to be a harmless exchange. Olivia gave a quick smile. Of course. I nodded, then added quietly, it's nice to see the people who matter in your life. For a moment, I thought maybe, just maybe, she would hear what I meant. But she didn't. She laughed lightly and turned back to her friends. See, she said, she's sweet, just very content with her little world. Little world. I felt something settle inside me then. Not anger, not even sadness exactly. Something quieter. A kind of understanding. I realized standing there in that bright, polished apartment that Olivia wasn't trying to hurt me. Not consciously. She truly believed what she was saying. To her, a life that wasn't visible wasn't valuable. And I had made mine invisible. That was my choice. After Thomas died, after everything we went through, I made a decision. Not to disappear, but to step out of the kind of life that demands recognition. I didn't want applause. I didn't want people to measure me. I wanted meaning. And meaning doesn't always look impressive. Sometimes it looks like silence. Sometimes it looks like early mornings and late nights that no one else notices. Sometimes it looks like being underestimated. I stayed for another half hour, long enough to finish a polite conversation with Rachel about the drive from the suburbs, long enough to accept a second glass of water I didn't drink, long enough to convince Olivia that I wasn't upset. When I finally said I was leaving, she walked me to the door. Already? She asked. I have an early morning tomorrow, I said. She nodded, barely curious. Drive safe. She hugged me quickly, already glancing back toward the living room. I held on to her for just a second longer than she expected. Not enough to make it awkward. just enough to remind myself what it felt like. Then I let go. The drive home felt longer than usual. The city lights faded behind me, replaced by the dark open stretch of highway. The radio played softly, but I barely heard it. My mind kept replaying her words. Doing nothing. Comfortable. Little world. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the house was exactly as I had left it. Quiet. Still. Waiting. I stepped inside, set my keys on the table, and stood there for a moment, letting the silence settle around me. This was the life Olivia couldn't understand. This stillness, this simplicity, this space. I walked into the kitchen and poured myself a cup of tea the same way I did every night. Routine, predictable, small. And yet, as I stood there, holding that warm cup in my hands, I felt something Olivia would never expect. Not emptiness, not regret, but purpose. Because while she was laughing in a room full of people who measured success in visible ways, I already knew where I would be in the morning, and what I would be doing, and how many lives it would touch. She thought my world was small, but she had never seen it. Not really. And soon she would. The next morning, I woke up at 4:45 a.m., not because I couldn't sleep, not because of what Olivia had said the night before, but because that had always been my time. There's something about the world before sunrise that feels honest. No noise, no expectations, just quiet space to exist without being measured. I moved through my routine the same way I always did, slowly, deliberately. I brewed a pot of coffee, packed a small bag, and checked the list I kept folded neatly beside the kitchen counter. Every item had a purpose. Every stop had a name attached to it. Not names Olivia would recognize, but names that mattered. By 5:30, I was in my car, the engine humming softly as I pulled out of the driveway. The streets were empty, the town still asleep. The sky held that faint gray-blue promise of morning, but the sun hadn't yet made its appearance. I liked it that way. It made everything feel unseen. And for what I did unseen was exactly what I needed. The drive took about 40 minutes, heading away from the part of town Olivia knew, past the familiar grocery stores and quiet neighborhoods, into an area most people avoided unless they had a reason. Old factories, worn-down buildings, streets that had once been busy but now carried only the echoes of what used to be. That was where I went, not because it was comfortable, but because it was necessary. I pulled into a small lot behind what looked like an abandoned warehouse. The paint on the walls had faded years ago, and from the outside, it was exactly the kind of place people drove past without a second glance. That was intentional. If you didn't know what happened inside, you would never guess. I turned off the engine and sat there for a moment, letting the stillness settle before stepping out. The air was colder here, sharper, but it woke you up. As I approached the side entrance, the door opened before I could reach for it. "Morning, Miss Bradford." It was Marcus. He was already there, as he always was, tall, steady, wearing the same worn jacket he'd had for as long as I'd known him. His voice carried warmth, the kind that comes from genuine respect, not obligation. "Good morning, Marcus," I said, smiling. He stepped aside to let me in. Inside the building told a completely different story. Lights were already on. Tables had been set up in rows. Boxes stacked neatly along the walls. The faint hum of activity filled the space, not loud, but purposeful. People moved with quiet efficiency, some sorting supplies, some checking lists, some just preparing. No one was idle. No one was there by accident. "Shipment came in late last night," Marcus said as we walked in. "We've got more than we expected this week." "That's good," I replied. "We'll need it." He nodded. "We always needed it." I set my bag down near the long table at the center of the room, and unfolded the list I had brought with me. Each line represented a family. Each name came with a story I had learned, sometimes in pieces, sometimes all at once. A mother who had lost her job, a grandfather raising his grandchildren, a young couple trying to keep their home after unexpected medical bills. They weren't statistics. They were people. And today, we were responsible for them. Let's start with the East Side deliveries, I said, scanning the list. They've had the longest wait this week. Marcus called out to a few of the others, and within minutes, the room shifted into motion. Boxes were stacked and loaded onto the truck utes. The room shifted into motion. Boxes were opened. Supplies sorted. Food packed carefully, not just for quantity, but for dignity. That was something I insisted on. No one receiving help should ever feel like they were receiving leftovers. Everything we prepared mattered. I moved from table to table, checking, adjusting, quietly guiding when needed. Most of them didn't need much guidance anymore. We had been doing this long enough that everyone understood the rhythm. Still, I watched. Not because I didn't trust them, but because I knew how much was at stake. At one point, a young woman approached me. Her name was Lila. She had joined us just a few months ago after being on the receiving end of our help herself. "Ms. Bradford," she said softly, holding a clipboard. "We added 3 more families to the list this morning. Is that okay?" I looked at the names, then at the boxes we had, then back at her. "We'll make it work," I said. "We always did. There was no other option." She smiled relief washing over her face and returned to her station. I watched her go, remembering the first day she walked through that same door, hesitant, unsure, carrying more weight than anyone her age should have to carry. Now she stood straighter, moved with purpose. That was the part Olivia would never understand. This wasn't just about giving. It was about restoring something people didn't even realize they had lost. Time passed quickly after that. It always did when the work was meaningful. By mid-morning, the first round of deliveries was ready. Volunteers lined up, loading boxes into their cars, checking addresses, confirming routes. Marcus handed me a set of keys. "You sure you want to take this one?" he asked. I glanced at the address. I recognized it immediately. "Yes," I said. "I'll take it." He nodded without question. He never questioned my choices. That was one of the reasons I trusted him. I carried the box myself, placing it carefully in the back seat of the old van we kept for deliveries. It wasn't much to look at, but it got the job done. Just like everything else we used. Simple, reliable, unnoticed. As I got behind the wheel, I paused for a moment, hands resting lightly on the steering wheel. This was the part of the day I valued the most. Not the organizing, not the planning, but the moment when preparation turned into impact, when something real reached someone who needed it. I started the engine and pulled out of the lot, the building shrinking in the rearview mirror. From the outside, it still looked like nothing. Just another forgotten structure in a part of town people avoided. But inside, lives were changing, quietly, consistently, without recognition, without applause. And as I drove toward my first stop, I thought about Olivia, about the way she had laughed, about the way she had said I did nothing. I didn't feel anger, not anymore, just certainty. Because while she was still trying to define what mattered, I had already found it. She just hadn't seen it yet. But she would. Sooner than either of us expected. The address Marcus handed me that morning wasn't just another stop on the list. It was one I recognized, not because I had been there recently, but because years ago, I had stood in a place just like it, with nothing left to hold on to. The neighborhood was quieter than the industrial area we worked out of, but not in a peaceful way. It carried a kind of stillness that comes from people trying to make ends meet, not from comfort. Small houses lined the street, many of them in need of repair. Faded paint, sagging porches, lawns that had long since given up pretending to be cared for. I parked in front of a narrow one-story home with a mailbox that leaned slightly to one side. The curtains were drawn. That was always the first sign. Not privacy, but protection. I turned off the engine and sat there for a moment, looking at the box in the back seat. Inside it was everything we could offer this week. Food basic supplies, a small envelope with assistance funds, and a note. I always included a note. Not signed, never signed, just a few words. You are not alone. Simple. But sometimes, simplicity is what reaches people the most. I picked up the box, steadying its weight against my hip, and walked up the short path to the front door. The wood creaked under my steps. I knocked gently. At first, nothing. Then a faint movement inside. The door opened just a few inches. A woman stood there, maybe in her early 30s. Her hair was pulled back loosely, strands falling out as if she hadn't had the energy to fix them. Her eyes carried that familiar look, tired, cautious, unsure whether hope was something she could afford. "Yes?" she asked softly. I smiled the same way I always did. "Delivery," I said. She frowned, slightly confused. "I didn't order anything." "You didn't have to," I replied. There was a pause, then her eyes dropped to the box. Something shifted in her expression, not quite recognition, but something close. "From?" she asked. I shook my head gently. "Just someone who wants to help." Her hand tightened slightly on the edge of the door. I could see the hesitation, pride, fear, doubt, all the things that make it hard to accept help, even when it's desperately needed. "I can't," she started. "You can," I said quietly, not interrupting, just steady. She looked at me then, really looked, not at my clothes, not at the box, at my face, as if trying to understand why a stranger would stand there at her door so early in the morning, offering something with no expectation in return. I held her gaze, because I remembered what that moment felt like. The moment when someone offers help and you don't know whether to trust it or push it away before it can disappoint you. "It's okay," I said gently. "No one will ask anything from you." Her lips pressed together, and then slowly she stepped back. "Okay," she whispered. I walked inside just enough to set the box on the small table near the door. The house was dim, the air heavy but clean. Someone was trying. There were toys in the corner. 2 children, maybe more. I glanced at the envelope and placed it on top of the box, making sure it was visible but not emphasized. "Everything you need for the week is inside," I said. "There's information if you need more support." She nodded, but her eyes were already filling with tears. "Thank you," she said, her voice breaking just slightly. I didn't respond with anything dramatic. I never do, because gratitude like that isn't meant to be interrupted. I just gave her a small nod and turned to leave. As I reached the door, I heard her say something behind me. "Wait." I paused. When can I repay this?" she asked. I turned back, meeting her eyes again. "You don't," I said. She looked confused. I smiled softly. "You pass it on when you can." Her expression shifted again this time, not with fear, but with something lighter. Hope. I stepped outside and closed the door gently behind me. The morning air felt different now. It always did after the first delivery. As I walked back to the van, I found myself thinking about the first time someone had said those exact words to me. You don't repay it. You pass it on. It had been 12 years ago, right after Thomas died. Everything had fallen apart so quickly back then. Medical bills, mortgage payments, things I had never needed to handle alone suddenly became my responsibility. And I wasn't ready. I remember sitting at the kitchen table staring at numbers that didn't make sense anymore. Numbers that told me I was going to lose everything. The house, the stability, the life we had built. I didn't tell Olivia how bad it was. She was still in college at the time, chasing her own future. I couldn't bring myself to burden her with my failure. So I carried it alone, until the day a box showed up at my door. No explanation, no name, just supplies and that same note. You are not alone. I cried for hours that day, not because of what was in the box, but because for the first time in months, someone had seen me. Truly seen me. And then, over the next few weeks, it happened again and again, until I realized it wasn't random. There was a system, a network. People working quietly behind the scenes, making sure others didn't fall as hard as they almost had. I found them eventually. Or maybe they found me. And when I did, I didn't ask questions. I didn't need to. I just said, "Tell me how I can help." That was the beginning. Not of a new life, but of a different way of living the one I already had. I climbed into the van and sat there for a moment, letting the memory settle. That woman inside the house. She didn't know it yet, but she was standing at the same beginning I once had. The difference was, she wouldn't have to find her way alone. I started the engine again, glancing at the next address on my list. There were still many more stops to make, many more doors, many more lives quietly waiting on the other side. And as I drove away, one thought stayed with me. Olivia believed my life was small because she had never seen moments like that. She had never stood at a door where hope and desperation lived side by side. She had never felt the weight of being the difference between someone holding on or letting go. But soon, she would understand, not through explanation, but through experience. Because life has a way of bringing people exactly where they need to be, even when they don't realize it. Especially then. If you had walked into that warehouse on any given morning, you would never have guessed what it truly was. You would see tables, boxes, people moving quietly. You would think it was a storage facility, or maybe a distribution center for some small business. You would not see what I saw. You would not see the invisible threads connecting every single person in that room to hundreds, sometimes thousands of lives beyond those walls. That was by design, because what we built was never meant to be seen. After I finished my deliveries that morning, I returned just before noon. The sun was high now, casting light through the high windows, illuminating the dust that floated gently in the air. Inside, the energy had shifted. The urgency of the morning rush had softened into a quieter rhythm. People were cleaning up, updating records, preparing for the next cycle. Marcus was near the back, speaking with 2 volunteers when he saw me. "How'd it go?" he asked, walking over. "The same as always," I said. "Hard at first, then a little lighter." He nodded. He understood exactly what I meant. He had lived it too. Marcus hadn't always been the man you see now. Steady, dependable, the one everyone relied on. Years ago, he had been on the other side of that door. I met him during one of our winter outreach programs. He had just lost his job, his apartment, and though he didn't say it out loud, his sense of direction. He didn't trust us at first. Most people don't. But he kept coming back. Not for the supplies, for the consistency, for the fact that we showed up every single time. Now he was the one making sure we never missed a step. "We had a call this morning," he said, lowering his voice slightly. "New case. Urgent." I looked at him, already knowing what that meant. How urgent, family of 3. Rent overdue. Utilities about to be shut off. "They've got maybe a week before things get worse." I exhaled slowly. There was always another case, always another story. "Add them to the priority list," I said. "We'll adjust the next shipment." Marcus nodded, making a note. "Already done." Of course it was. That's why I trusted him. I walked further into the room, stopping near the long board we used to track everything. It wasn't digital. No screens, no software, just names, dates, notes written by hand. People might call that outdated. I call it intentional. Because when you write something down yourself, it stays with you differently. Each name becomes real. Each situation becomes personal. I ran my fingers lightly over a few of the entries. Some names had been there for weeks, others, months, and some had check marks beside them. Not because their problems were gone, but because they had reached a point where they could stand on their own again. Those were the moments that mattered, not the scale, not the numbers, the transitions. The quiet shift from needing help to becoming part of the solution. "Ms. Bradford." I turned. It was Daniel. He was younger than most of our volunteers, mid-20s maybe. He had joined about a year ago after hearing about us through someone we had helped. "Yes," I said. "We got confirmation on last month's outreach," he said, holding a folder. "Total count just over 3,000 families." He said it carefully, like he wasn't sure how I would react. People often expect a reaction to numbers like that. Excitement, pride, something visible. But numbers have never been what mattered to me. Still, I felt it. Not pride. Something quieter. A kind of steady reassurance. "That's good," I said simply. He nodded, but I could see the curiosity in his eyes. He had asked me once, early on, why I never talked about what we were doing. Why we didn't promote it. Why we didn't seek funding the way larger organizations did. I had given him the same answer I give everyone. Because the moment this becomes about recognition, it stops being what it's supposed to be. He didn't fully understand it then. I think he's starting to now. As Daniel walked away, I found myself thinking about Olivia again. 3,000 families. That was the number he had just said. 3,000. If she had heard that number, she would have been impressed, maybe even proud. But she wouldn't have understood it. Not the way I did. Because to her, 3,000 would be a statistic. To me, it was 3,000 individual stories. 3,000 moments where someone stood at a door unsure if they could accept help and chose to. 3,000 chances to remind someone they were not invisible. I moved toward the small office space we had set up in the corner. It wasn't much, just a desk, a filing cabinet, and a chair that had seen better days. On the desk sat a stack of letters, some unopened, some already read and carefully folded back. I picked one up at random. The handwriting was uneven, the kind that comes from someone who isn't used to writing often. "Thank you," it began. That was how most of them started. I read slowly, letting the words settle. The letter spoke about a family that had nearly lost everything, about how the support they received had given them just enough time to recover, just enough space to breathe, just enough hope to keep going. At the end, there was the line I had seen many times before. "When I can, I want to help someone else the way you helped us." I closed my eyes for a moment. That was it. That was the entire point. Not dependency, not charity, continuity. A chain that kept moving forward even when no one was watching. I placed the letter back on the desk and sat down. For a moment, I allowed myself to rest. Not physically, but mentally. Because work like this, it doesn't end. There is always another need, another story, another moment where someone is standing on the edge, hoping something, anything, will reach them in time. And we do our best to be that something, quietly, consistently, without expectation. Across town, Olivia was probably sitting in her office, surrounded by screens and meetings and deadlines. She believed impact looked like visibility, like recognition, like something you could point to and say, I did that. But this was different. This was invisible, and yet it reached further than anything she could imagine. I leaned back in the chair, staring at the ceiling for a moment. I didn't resent her. I never had, because I knew something she didn't. Understanding doesn't come from being told. It comes from being placed in a position where you have no choice but to see. And life has a way of placing people exactly where they need to be. Even Olivia, especially Olivia, she thought my life was quiet, that it lacked purpose, that it had faded. But she had only ever seen the surface, and surfaces are easy to misjudge. What she didn't know, what she couldn't know yet, was that everything she believed about me, about value, about success, about what it means to matter, was about to be tested. Not by me, but by her own life. And when that moment came, she would remember everything she had said, everything she had dismissed, everything she had failed to see, and maybe, just maybe, she would finally understand. The call came 3 days later. Not to me, to Olivia. I didn't know about it at the time, of course. I was in the warehouse that morning reviewing next week's supply requests, adjusting numbers that never quite seemed to balance because need always outweighed resources. But across the city, in a glass office high above the streets of Chicago, something in Olivia's carefully constructed life began to crack. She had always been good at reading situations, at anticipating change, at staying ahead. That was part of what made her successful. But sometimes, the biggest shifts don't come with warning. They arrive quietly. And by the time you recognize them, they've already begun. From what she later told me, it started with a meeting. An all-hands meeting. The kind that appears on your calendar with no explanation, but carries a weight you can feel before you even step into the room. She had walked in expecting updates, strategy discussions, maybe a new campaign. What she found instead was silence. Not the comfortable kind, the heavy kind, the kind that tells you something is about to change and not in your favor. Her boss stood at the front of the room holding a sheet of paper he barely looked at. His voice was steady but distant. Due to restructuring and budget constraints. Those were the words that began it. Words Olivia had probably heard before. Words she had never imagined would apply to her. She told me later that she didn't fully process what was happening at first. Not until she heard her name. Not until she saw the way people around her avoided eye contact. Not until the meeting ended and someone from HR gently asked her to stay behind. That's when it became real. Her position eliminated. Effective immediately, they used careful language. They always do. Restructuring, realignment, strategic direction. But beneath all of it, the truth was simple. She was no longer needed. For someone like Olivia, that wasn't just a job loss. It was a collapse. Because her identity had been built around that role, around being the one people relied on, the one who succeeded, the one who moved forward while others struggled to keep up. And suddenly, She wasn't that person anymore. She packed her things in silence. A few framed photos, her laptop, a notebook filled with plans that no longer mattered. No one said much as she left. A few polite goodbyes, a few sympathetic looks, but mostly distance. Because uncertainty makes people uncomfortable, and failure, even temporary, has a way of isolating you. She didn't call me that day, not when she got home, not when she sat alone in her apartment, the city stretching out beneath her like nothing had changed. Because for everyone else had changed. Because for everyone else, nothing had. The world kept moving. Cars still filled the streets. Lights still flickered on as evening approached. People still laughed in restaurants, still made plans, still lived their lives. But inside that apartment, nothing had. The world kept moving. Cars still filled the streets. Lights still flickered on as evening approached. People still laughed in restaurants, still made plans, still lived their lives. But inside that apartment, everything had shifted. She told me she stood by the window for a long time, looking out, trying to understand how something so solid could disappear so quickly. She had savings, of course, enough to carry her for a while. But it wasn't about money. Not yet. It was about control. And for the first time in a long time, she felt like she didn't have any. The next few days blurred together. Applications sent, calls made, messages left unanswered. Opportunities that once would have been hers without question now required waiting. Negotiation. Hope. And hope is not something Olivia had practiced often. She was used to certainty, to earning her place, to knowing that if she worked hard enough, things would fall into line. But life doesn't always follow effort. Sometimes it follows timing, and sometimes it doesn't follow anything at all. A week passed, then another. The responses slowed. The calls became less frequent. The confidence she carried so effortlessly before began to fade, just slightly at first, then more noticeably. She stopped going out as much, stopped answering invitations. Even the apartment, once a symbol of her success, began to feel different. Too quiet, too large, too empty. And still, she didn't call me. Not because she didn't think of me, but because she did. Too often. She remembered the things she had said, the way she had laughed, the way she had dismissed my life so easily. And now, standing in the middle of her own uncertainty, she couldn't bring herself to reach out. Pride is a complicated thing. It protects you until it isolates you. By the third week, the situation had changed in ways she couldn't ignore. Her savings were still there, but the steady flow of income wasn't. Expenses that once felt insignificant now carried weight. Rent, utilities. Daily costs that had always been background noise suddenly demanded attention. That's when fear begins to take shape. Not loud, not dramatic, just present, constant. She started making adjustments, cutting back, reorganizing, telling herself it was temporary, that something would come through, that it always did. But beneath that confidence, something else was growing. Something unfamiliar. Something she had never truly experienced before. Uncertainty. Real uncertainty. The kind that doesn't resolve itself overnight. The kind that lingers. That forces you to sit with it, to face it, to feel it, and eventually to change because of it. She didn't know it yet, but she was moving closer to something, closer to a moment that would shift everything she believed about herself, about success, about what it means to need help. And when that moment came, it wouldn't look like failure. It would look like something else entirely. something she had never truly understood, not until she had no choice. And as she sat alone in that apartment one evening, staring at numbers that no longer felt secure, there was one thought she couldn't quite shake. Not about her job, not about her future, but about me, about the life she had called small, about the quiet she had dismissed. And for the first time, she wondered. Not with judgment, but with something new. What if she had been wrong? By the fourth week, Olivia stopped checking her email first thing in the morning. Not because she didn't care anymore, but because hope, when repeated too many times without reward, starts to feel like something you have to protect yourself from. Instead, she began her days slowly. Coffee. Silence. A kind of hesitation before facing whatever the day might or might not bring. Her apartment, once filled with the rhythm of a structured life, had taken on a different atmosphere. Still beautiful, still immaculate, but no longer alive. The space echoed now, not with sound, but with absence. She started noticing things she had never paid attention to before. The hum of the refrigerator, the way the light shifted across the floor as the sun moved, the quiet, so much quiet. And in that quiet, thoughts she had always managed to outrun began to catch up with her. At first, she filled the silence with activity, job applications, networking messages, endless scrolling through listings that all seemed to demand something she suddenly felt unsure she still had. Experience, confidence, certainty. She had always had those things before. Now they felt fragile, like something that could disappear at any moment, which she realized they already had. The first real shift came when her landlord sent a reminder. It wasn't aggressive, just a standard notice. Rent due in 5 days. 5 days? That had never been something she worried about before. Rent was automatic, expected, a background detail in a life that moved too quickly to focus on small things. Now it was front and center. She opened her banking app that afternoon and stared at the numbers. They were still there, still solid, but no longer untouchable. For the first time, she did the math, not from a place of comfort, but from a place of caution. How long could this last? How much could she stretch it? What if nothing changed? Those questions lingered longer than she expected. That evening, she declined 2 invitations. One from a colleague who didn't know she had lost her job. Another from Rachel, the same woman from that night at her apartment. Olivia typed out a response, then deleted it. Typed again, deleted again. In the end, she settled for something simple. Not feeling well. Rain check. It wasn't entirely a lie. She didn't feel well. Just not in a way that could be explained easily. The days that followed blurred into a pattern she didn't recognize herself in. Wake up. Try to stay productive. Feel the weight of uncertainty settle in. Distract herself. Repeat. At some point, she stopped getting dressed in the morning. Not fully, just enough to be comfortable. No more polished outfits, no more careful presentation. There was no one to see her, no one to impress, no role to step into. And without that role, she wasn't entirely sure who she was supposed to be. One afternoon, she found herself standing in front of her closet, staring at rows of clothes that had once meant something. Each piece represented a version of herself she had built carefully. Professional, confident, successful. She reached out and touched one of the blazers she used to wear to important meetings. For a moment, she could almost feel it again, that certainty, that sense of direction. But it faded quickly. because now it felt like a costume, something she no longer had the right to wear. She closed the closet door slowly, and for the first time, she sat down on the edge of her bed and allowed herself to feel it. Not frustration, not even fear, but loss. Not just of a job, but of identity, of control, of the version of herself she had worked so hard to become. Tears came quietly, unexpectedly. She didn't sob, didn't break down, just sat there, letting them fall. Because there was no one there to see, no one there to judge. And in that moment, something shifted. Not dramatically, not in a way that would change everything overnight, but just enough. Just enough to open a door in her mind that had been closed for a very long time. She thought of me, not the version of me she had described to her friends, not the quiet life, not the doing nothing, but something else, something she hadn't allowed herself to consider before. She remembered the way I had stood in her apartment that night. Calm, unbothered, almost certain. At the time, she had mistaken that for passivity, for lack of ambition. Now, sitting alone in a silence she didn't know how to handle, she began to wonder if she had misunderstood it completely. What if it wasn't emptiness? What if it was stability? What if the quiet she had dismissed wasn't a lack of life, but a different kind of strength? The thought unsettled her, because if that were true, then everything she had believed about success might not be as solid as she thought. The next morning, she did something she hadn't done in weeks. She picked up her phone, scrolled through her contacts, and stopped at my name. Mom. Her thumb hovered over it for a long time. Minutes passed, maybe more. She lowered the phone, picked it up again, lowered it once more, because calling me meant more than just reaching out. It meant acknowledging something, not just her situation, but her perspective, her words, the way she had seen me, and she wasn't sure she was ready to face that yet. So she didn't call. Not that day. Instead, she did something smaller, something quieter. She opened her laptop and searched for something she had never looked for before. Local support resources. The words felt strange, unfamiliar, but necessary. Results filled the screen. Food assistance, housing support, community programs. She skimmed through them quickly at first, then more slowly. One listing caught her attention. It wasn't flashy, didn't have a large website or bold promises, just a simple description. Confidential support for families in transition. No application required. No application. That was unusual. Most programs required forms, verification, proof. This one didn't. She clicked on it. The page was minimal. An address, a time, a short note. You are not alone. She stared at those words for a long time. They felt familiar, but she couldn't place why. Her instinct was to close the page, to tell herself she didn't need this, that she could handle things on her own, that this wasn't who she was. But another thought followed quickly behind it. What if this is exactly who you are now? The question stayed with her, uncomfortable, unavoidable, and for the first time since everything had changed. She didn't have an immediate answer, because the truth was, she was standing at a place she had never been before, a place where certainty didn't exist, where control was limited, where asking for help wasn't weakness, but possibility. She didn't know it yet, but the address on that screen would lead her somewhere she never expected. Somewhere that would force her to confront everything she had believed. About herself. About me. About what it truly means to live a life that matters. And when she walked through that door, she wouldn't be prepared for what she would find. Because on the other side of that quiet, unremarkable building was a world she had spent years overlooking. A world that had been there all along. Waiting. She almost didn't go. Olivia stood in front of the mirror that morning longer than she needed to, adjusting nothing, changing nothing, just staring at herself as if she were trying to recognize someone she used to know. The woman looking back at her wasn't the one who hosted elegant dinners or walked confidently into meetings where people listened when she spoke. This version was quieter, uncertain, careful, and that unsettled her more than anything else. The address was still open on her laptop behind her. She had read it 3 times already, memorized it even. But actually going there, that felt different. Final. Like crossing a line she couldn't uncross. "You don't need this," she whispered to herself. But the words didn't hold the same weight they once would have, because the truth had already started to shift. Maybe she did need it, not because she had failed, but because she was human. And humans sometimes need help. That thought sat uncomfortably in her chest. Still, she grabbed her coat. Not the tailored one she used to wear. Just something simple. Practical. She picked up her keys, hesitated for a second, and then walked out the door. The drive felt longer than expected. Not because of distance, but because of what it represented. Every mile felt like a step away from the life she had known and a step towards something she didn't understand. She followed the directions, carefully watching as the city shifted around her. The buildings became older, the streets less polished, the energy different. She noticed things she hadn't paid attention to before. People standing outside small shops. Children playing on sidewalks. Faces that looked tired but not defeated. There was something about it that made her feel both out of place and strangely aware. She turned onto the final street and slowed the car. The building was exactly as described. If she hadn't been looking for it, she would have driven right past. No sign. No indication of what it was. Just an old structure that blended into its surroundings. "This can't be it," she murmured. But it was. Her instinct told her to leave, to turn around, to go back to the safety of her apartment, her routines, her carefully controlled world. But something else, something quieter, told her to stay. She parked the car, sat there for a moment, hands resting on the steering wheel. Heart beating faster than she expected. This wasn't her world. This wasn't where she belonged. At least that's what she had always believed. But belief has a way of changing when reality presses against it. She stepped out of the car. The air felt colder here. Or maybe it was just her nerves. Each step toward the building felt heavier than it should have. By the time she reached the door, her hand hesitated mid-air before knocking. Just one knock. Soft, almost uncertain. For a moment, nothing happened, and she almost felt relief. But then the door opened. Marcus stood there. He looked at her calmly, as if seeing new faces wasn't unusual. It probably wasn't. "Can I help you?" he asked. Olivia opened her mouth, then closed it again. All the words she had prepared on the drive over suddenly felt wrong. Too formal. Too distant. I saw the listing online," she said finally. Marcus nodded, stepping slightly to the side. "Come in. No questions, no judgment, just acceptance." That alone caught her off guard. She stepped inside. and everything she expected to feel shifted. It wasn't chaotic. It wasn't disorganized. It wasn't desperate. It was structured, calm, purposeful. People moved with intention. Boxes were being sorted, lists checked, conversations held in quiet, steady tones. There was no panic here, no visible struggle, just work. Real work. Olivia stood near the entrance, unsure where to go or what to do. She had imagined something completely different, something that would confirm her assumptions about places like this. But this didn't fit into anything she understood. "First time Marcus asked." She nodded. He gestured toward a table nearby. "Just take a seat. Someone will come talk to you." Again, simple, direct, no pressure. She sat down slowly, her eyes moving across the room, taking everything in. And then something caught her attention. A phrase, printed on a small card attached to one of the boxes. "You are not alone." Her breath caught slightly. That phrase, she had seen it before, online, on that page, but now seeing it here in a real place attached to something tangible. It felt different, more real, more intentional. Her fingers tightened slightly in her lap. She didn't know why that phrase affected her the way it did, but it did. Minutes passed, or maybe it was longer. Time felt strange in that space. Eventually, footsteps approached. "Hi there." Olivia looked up. It was Lila. She smiled warmly, holding a clipboard. "My name's Lila. I just need to ask you a few questions, okay?" Olivia nodded. The questions were simple, not invasive, not demanding, just enough to understand. Living situation, employment status, immediate needs. Olivia answered carefully at first, then more honestly, because something about the space made honesty feel safe. When Lila finished, she smiled again. "Okay," she said. "We can help, just like that. No hesitation, no complicated process." "Well, put something together for you today," she added. Olivia blinked. "Today?" Lila nodded. "Of course." That word again. Of course. As if helping someone in need wasn't something extraordinary. As if it was expected. Normal. Olivia sat back, slightly processing everything. This wasn't what she thought it would be. There was no sense of charity being given from above. No feeling of being looked down on. If anything, she felt something else entirely. Respected. That realization unsettled her more than anything else had so far. Because she had expected to feel small. Instead, she felt seen. And as she sat there watching people move through the room with quiet purpose, a thought began to form. Slowly, uncomfortably, but undeniably. What if this is what Mom meant? The idea came out of nowhere, or maybe it had been building for a while. She thought about my house, the quiet, the routines, the calm certainty she had mistaken for lack of ambition. What if it wasn't that? What if there was something behind it she had never taken the time to understand? Her chest tightened slightly. Because if that were true, then she hadn't just misunderstood my life. She had dismissed it, reduced it, laughed at it. And now, sitting in a place that felt more purposeful than anything she had experienced in weeks, she realized something else. She didn't know everything. She never had. And that realization was the beginning of something far more uncomfortable than losing a job. It was the beginning of humility. Real humility. The kind that doesn't come from failure alone, but from seeing the world differently than you once did. She didn't know it yet, but she was sitting just a few feet away from something even more significant, something that would connect everything. The warehouse, the phrase, the quiet life she had mocked, and me. Because this place, This carefully built invisible network of support was not random. It had a source, a center, a person behind it all. And very soon, Olivia was going to find out who that was. I remember that morning clearly. Not because anything unusual happened at first, but because something felt different. There are days when you can sense a shift before you understand it. A subtle tension in the air. A quiet awareness that something is about to change. That morning felt like that. I arrived at the warehouse earlier than usual. The sky was still dark, the streets nearly empty. My routine was unchanged. Unlock the door, turn on the lights, check the boards, but my mind kept drifting. Back to Olivia. I hadn't heard from her in weeks. At first, I told myself she was busy. Then I told myself she was fine. But a mother knows when silence carries more than distance. Still, I didn't call. Not because I didn't want to, but because I understood something she didn't yet. People have to reach certain moments on their own. You can't guide them there. You can't force clarity. You can only be ready when they arrive. By the time the others started coming in, I had already gone through most of the morning setup. Marcus noticed it immediately. "You're early," he said. "So are you," I replied. He smiled slightly. "We didn't need to say much." That's the kind of understanding that develops over time. By mid-morning, the space was alive with its usual rhythm. Volunteers moved through their tasks, lists were updated, and the quiet energy that defined this place settled in. And then the door opened. I didn't see her at first. I was at the far end of the room reviewing a delivery list with Daniel. We were discussing adjustments for the new cases Marcus had added when I heard the faint shift in the room. Not noise, but attention. A slight pause in movement, a subtle change in energy. I looked up, and there she was, Olivia, standing just inside the doorway. Still, uncertain. Her posture was different, not the confident stance I had seen so many times before, not the sharp, composed presence she carried so effortlessly in her world. This was something else, something quieter. For a moment, neither of us moved. The distance between us wasn't large, but it felt like it carried years of misunderstanding, of assumptions, of things left unsaid. Her eyes scanned the room first, taking it in, processing. And then they landed on me. I watched the moment recognition fully settled in. The moment everything connected. The building, the people, the phrase she had seen, the quiet life she had dismissed. Her lips parted slightly, but no words came. She didn't need them, because the truth was already there, visible, undeniable. I stepped toward her slowly, not rushing, not making a scene, just closing the distance. "Good morning, Olivia," I said gently. My voice didn't carry surprise or judgment, just familiarity. She swallowed, her eyes still fixed on me. "You," she began, but stopped. I waited. Because this wasn't a moment to fill. It was a moment to let her reach on her own. "You're here," she finally said, though the question didn't quite make sense even to her. I gave a small, almost amused smile. "I could say the same to you." That broke something, not dramatically, but enough. Her composure shifted. Her shoulders dropped slightly, as if she had been holding something up for too long. "I didn't know," she said, quietly. Of course she didn't. That had been the point. "I know," I replied. She looked around the room again. At Marcus, at Lila, at the volunteers, at the organized chaos she had expected to be something else entirely. "This is yours?" she asked. I shook my head gently. "No." She frowned, confused. "It's not mine," I said. "It's everyone's." That answer didn't satisfy her. Not yet. Because she was still thinking in terms of ownership, of credit, of control. Concepts that didn't apply here, but you started it. That answer didn't satisfy her. Not yet, because she was still thinking in terms of ownership, of credit, of control. Concepts that didn't apply here. But you started it, she pressed. I paused, not because I didn't know the answer, but because I wanted her to understand it. I helped build it, I said, with people who needed it and people who were willing to give. Her eyes searched mine, looking for something more. A claim, a confirmation, a reason to frame this in a way she understood. But there wasn't one, not in the way she expected. Silence settled between us again. But this time, it wasn't uncomfortable. It was necessary. I came here because... She started, then stopped again. Her voice caught slightly. I saw it then, the shift, the vulnerability she had never allowed me to see before. You don't have to explain, I said, softly. That seemed to affect her more than anything else, because she had spent her life explaining, justifying, proving, and here she didn't have to. Her eyes filled slightly, though she blinked it back quickly. I lost my job, she said. There it was, simple, direct, real. I nodded. I figured something had changed. She looked at me surprised. You knew I didn't know what I said, but I knew something. She exhaled slowly, as if releasing a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. And you didn't call? She asked. There was no accusation in her voice. Just curiosity. I thought about it, I admitted. But I also know you. That made her pause. What does that mean? She asked. It means, I said gently, you needed to get here on your own. Her eyes flickered slightly. To the room. To the people. Back to me. And this is where I ended up, she said almost in disbelief. I smiled softly. Yes. She let out a small, almost disbelieving laugh. I used to think she began but couldn't finish. I know, I said, because I did. I remembered every word she had said, every assumption she had made, but none of it mattered now. Not in this moment. What is this place? She asked finally. Not with judgment, but with genuine curiosity. That was new. I glanced around the room, at the people moving quietly, at the work being done without recognition. At its core, I said, it's a second chance. She absorbed that. And you've been doing this all this time? She asked. Yes, without telling anyone. Yes. Why? That question. That was the one that mattered. I looked at her carefully, making sure she was ready to hear the answer. Because it was never about being seen, I said. It was about making sure no one else felt invisible. Her breath caught slightly. And in that moment, I saw it. The realization. Not complete. Not fully formed. But there. The beginning of understanding. And with it, the beginning of something else. Not just humility. Not just perspective. But connection. Because for the first time, she wasn't looking at me as someone who had chosen a small life. She was looking at me as someone who had chosen a different kind of impact, one she had never taken the time to understand. Until now. Olivia didn't leave that day. That more than anything told me how much had already changed. At first, she stayed close to the entrance, observing, processing, trying to make sense of a world that didn't fit into any category she had built for herself. I didn't push her. I didn't assign her anything. I simply let her be there, because understanding doesn't come from explanation. It comes from experience. After a while, Marcus approached her again. "Would you like to help?" he asked. It wasn't framed as a favor or an obligation, just an option. Olivia hesitated. I could see it in the way her shoulders tensed slightly. Helping meant stepping into something unfamiliar. It meant letting go of the role she was used to playing, the one in control. But then she glanced at me, just briefly, and something in her expression shifted. "Okay," she said quietly. Marcus handed her a pair of gloves and guided her to one of the tables where supplies were being sorted. It was simple work: packaging food, organizing essentials, checking lists. Nothing complicated, nothing that required expertise. But that was the point. Impact doesn't always come from complexity. Sometimes it comes from consistency. At first, her movements were careful, measured, as if she were afraid of doing something wrong. She watched the others closely, mimicking their pace, their rhythm. Lila worked beside her, offering quiet guidance. "No rush," she said. "We just make sure everything's there." Olivia nodded, focusing on the task in front of her. And slowly, something began to change. Her breathing steadied. Her movements became more natural. The tension in her posture eased. Because for the first time in weeks, she wasn't thinking about what she had lost. She was focused on what she could do. And that shift, that's where healing begins. I watched from a distance, not as a supervisor, not as someone evaluating her, but as a mother. Seeing her step into something she never thought she would understand. An hour passed, then another. She didn't check her phone, didn't look at the time, didn't try to leave. She stayed. Present. Engaged. At some point, a van pulled up outside, another delivery run. Marcus called out for a few volunteers. Without thinking, Olivia looked up. "I can go," she said. The words surprised even her. I could see it. Marcus raised an eyebrow slightly, then nodded. "All right, come with me." I followed a few steps behind as they moved toward the loading area. Boxes were being stacked into the van, each one labeled carefully. Olivia watched closely, her expression shifting as she began to understand the scale of what was happening. "This all goes out today?" she asked. Marcus nodded. "Every day." She paused. "How many?" "Depends," he said. "Sometimes dozens, sometimes hundreds." Her eyes widened slightly. "And this is just one place?" "Yes." She didn't respond right away, because the realization was beginning to settle. This wasn't small. This wasn't insignificant. This wasn't a quiet life without purpose. This was something far larger than anything she had imagined. And it had been right in front of her the entire time, hidden in plain sight. Marcus handed her a clipboard. "Just check the addresses as we load," he said. She nodded, taking it carefully. Her hands moved over the list, reading each name, each location, each story she couldn't yet see, but now knew existed. We finished loading in silence. Not uncomfortable silence, but thoughtful. The kind that comes when your perspective is shifting faster than you can keep up with. As Marcus closed the back doors of the van, Olivia turned to me. I had no idea she said. There was no defensiveness in her voice, no attempt to explain her past assumptions, just honesty. "I know," I replied. She looked down at the clipboard again. "These are real people," she said softly. "Yes. And their dependings on this." "Yes," she swallowed. "And you've been doing this for years." I nodded. "And you never told me." There it was again, that question. But this time, it carried something different. Not confusion, but something closer to regret. "I didn't need to," I said gently. That answer stayed with her. I could see it in the way she looked at me, not with frustration, but with a kind of quiet realization, because she was starting to understand something she had never considered before. Not everything meaningful needs to be announced. Not everything valuable needs to be visible. Some of the most important things in life happen quietly, without recognition, without applause, without anyone knowing except the people it reaches. "Can I come with you?" she asked suddenly. Marcus glanced at me. I didn't hesitate. "Of course," I said, because this was the moment she needed. Not to be told, but to see, to feel, to stand at that door the way so many others had. We drove in silence at first. Olivia sat in the passenger seat, the clipboard resting on her lap. She kept looking at it, at the names, as if trying to imagine the lives behind them. Marcus drove steadily focused. I sat in the back watching, not just the road, but her, the way her posture had changed, the way her attention had shifted outward instead of inward. That's what purpose does. It pulls you out of your own struggles just enough to breathe again. We arrived at the first house. Marcus turned off the engine. "Ready?" he asked. Olivia hesitated for just a second, then nodded. "Ready." She stepped out of the van, picking up one of the boxes carefully. I watched her walk up to the door, saw the slight pause before she knocked. The same hesitation I had seen so many times before. And then the door opened. A man stood there, older worn, but alert. Olivia held the box out slightly. "Delivery," she said. Her voice was steady, not perfect, but real. The man looked confused at first, then at the box, then back at her. "I didn't order anything," he said. She hesitated, just for a moment, and then she remembered. I could see it. "You don't have to," she said softly. The words landed, not just for him, but for her. Because in that moment, she wasn't just repeating something she had heard. She was understanding it. The man stepped back slowly, letting her inside. And as she crossed that threshold, everything shifted. Not in a dramatic way, not in a way anyone else would notice, but inside her, something fundamental changed. Because she was no longer standing outside this world, judging it, questioning it. She was part of it. And once you step into something like that, you can't go back to seeing things the same way. You just can't. When Olivia stepped inside that house, she didn't realize she was walking into the moment that would break her completely and rebuild her at the same time. The man who opened the door, whose name was Harold Jenkins, lived alone in a small, aging home that had seen better days. The paint on the walls had faded unevenly, and the furniture looked like it had been there longer than Olivia had been alive. But that wasn't what caught her attention. It was the way he looked at the box in her hands, not with excitement, not even with relief at first, but with disbelief. "You sure this is for me?" he asked again, his voice quieter now. Olivia nodded, holding the box a little closer to him. "Yes, it's for you." He hesitated before taking it as if he was afraid that if he moved too quickly, it might disappear. That moment stayed with her, because she had never seen gratitude like that before. Not in the way she was used to, not polished, not expressed in words that sounded practiced or expected. This was something else, something raw, something honest. He stepped aside, gesturing for them to come in. "You don't have to," Olivia began. "I insist," he said gently. So she followed. The house was quiet. Too quiet. Not the kind of quiet she used to complain about when she visited me. This was different. This was the quiet of someone who had no one to talk to, no one to interrupt the silence, no one to fill it. Harold set the box on the table carefully, almost reverently. "I didn't think anyone remembered," he said. The words landed heavily. Olivia frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" He let out a small breath. "My wife used to handle everything," he said. "Bills, groceries, all of it. When she passed last year, I thought I could manage." He smiled faintly, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Turns out I was wrong." Olivia felt something tighten in her chest, because for the first time, she wasn't just hearing a situation. She was hearing a life. "I fell behind," he continued. "Didn't realize how quickly things add up when you're alone." He opened the box slowly, looking inside. Food, basic supplies, things that in Olivia's world had always been taken for granted. His hands trembled slightly as he touched the items. "This," he paused, swallowing. "This gives me time. Time." That word echoed in Olivia's mind, because just weeks ago, time had been something she never worried about, and now she understood exactly what he meant. Time to recover. Time to figure things out. Time to breathe. She glanced around the house again, and suddenly, it didn't look like a place that had been neglected. It looked like a place that had been overwhelmed. There was a difference, a big one. "Thank you," Harold said again, his voice softer now. Olivia opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out, because she didn't know what to say, because "you're welcome" didn't feel like enough, because she wasn't used to being on this side of something that mattered this much. So she just nodded, and for the first time in her life, silence felt like the right response. When they stepped back outside, the air felt different, heavier but clearer. Marcus moved ahead toward the van, giving Olivia space. I stayed a few steps behind her watching. She didn't speak right away, didn't rush to fill the silence. She just stood there for a moment, looking back at the house, as if trying to process everything she had just felt. She started, then stopped. I waited, because I knew this wasn't something that could be rushed. "It mattered," she said finally. Not dramatically, not emotionally, just truthfully. "Yes," I said. She turned to me, her expression different now. Not confused, not defensive, but open. "More than anything I've done in months," she admitted. That was the moment, the shift from observation to understanding. She looked down at her hands, still slightly trembling. "I used to think impact meant scale," she said slowly. "Big numbers, big recognition, something people could see." She shook her head slightly, but she gestured toward the house. "That was just one person." I smiled softly. "And it mattered just as much as any number you've ever seen." She let that sink in, because it challenged everything she had built her identity around. "And you do this every day," she said. "Yes, without anyone knowing. Yes." She exhaled slowly. "I don't think I understand how you did that." I looked at her carefully. "You will," I said. Not as reassurance, but as certainty, because she was already beginning to. The next few deliveries blurred together. Different homes, different faces, different stories, but the same pattern: hesitation, relief, gratitude. Each one left its mark on her. I could see it building, not overwhelming her, but reshaping her. By the time we returned to the warehouse, the sun was beginning to set. The light filtered through the windows, casting long shadows across the room. Olivia stepped inside more confidently this time, not as a visitor, but as someone who understood at least a little what this place was. She placed the empty clipboard back on the table and stood there for a moment, looking around, taking it all in again, but this time, differently. "This isn't small," she said quietly. No one had to ask what she meant. "No," I replied. "It never was." She nodded slowly. I was wrong. The words were simple, but they carried weight. Because Olivia didn't say things like that easily, not before. I walked over and stood beside her. "It's okay," I said gently. She looked at me, her eyes clearer now than they had been in weeks. "No," she said. "It's not just okay." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "I didn't just misunderstand you," she said. "I dismissed you. I didn't interrupt. Because this mattered to her. I thought I knew what a meaningful life looked like," she continued. "And I judged yours based on that." Her voice softened. "But I didn't know anything." I reached out, placing a hand lightly on her arm. "You knew what you had experienced," I said. "That's all anyone ever starts with." She nodded, but I could tell she wasn't finished. "And now?" she asked. The question hung between us. Not about her job, not about her situation, but about something deeper. Her direction, her identity, her understanding of what comes next. I looked around the room, at the people, at the work still being done, at the quiet purpose that had defined my life for years. "Now," I said gently, "you get to decide what matters to you." She followed my gaze, and for the first time, she didn't see something small. She saw something powerful, and more importantly, something she could be part of. The next morning, Olivia came back. She didn't call ahead, didn't ask if she could. She just showed up. That alone told me more than anything she could have said. Because the first time she came, she had arrived out of uncertainty, out of need. This time, she came by choice. I saw her standing outside before she walked in, her hand resting lightly on the door, as if she were grounding herself. Not hesitating. Just, this time, she came by choice. I saw her standing outside before she walked in, her hand resting lightly on the door, as if she were grounding herself. Not hesitating, just acknowledging the step she was about to take. When she entered, Marcus looked up first. A small smile crossed his face. "Back again," he said. Olivia nodded. "Yeah." No explanation, no justification. She didn't need one. He handed her a pair of gloves without another word. "That's how this place worked. If you showed up, you were already part of it." I watched her move through the room differently this time, more confident, more aware. She didn't linger near the entrance, didn't observe from a distance. She stepped directly into the flow of things, helping, organizing, asking questions when she needed to, learning without being told. It was subtle, but it was real, and it mattered. By midday, she found me near the back reviewing a new list Marcus had prepared. "I've been thinking," she said. I looked up. That's usually a good sign, I replied. She smiled faintly, but there was something serious behind it. I want to help more, she said. Not just the words, the way she said them. That was the difference. This wasn't about filling time or distracting herself from what she had lost. This was intentional. What does that look like to you? I asked. She paused, considering. Yesterday I saw how many people this reaches, she said, and I realized something. I waited. I've spent my entire career building systems, she continued, managing resources, scaling operations. She looked around the warehouse. This is already doing that, she said, but it could do more. There it was. Not a takeover, not control, but contribution. From a place of respect. That depends, I said gently. More isn't always better. She nodded quickly. I know, she said. I'm not talking about making it bigger just to make it bigger. She stepped closer, lowering her voice slightly. I'm talking about making it stronger. That caught my attention. Because strength, that's something this place had always needed more of. Not visibility, not recognition, but sustainability. What do you have in mind? I asked. Her eyes lit up slightly. Not with excitement, but with clarity. Tracking, she said. Not in a way that turns this into a business, but enough to understand patterns. She gestured toward the boards. We know who we're helping, she said, but we could also understand how long they need support when they recover where the gaps are. I didn't interrupt, because I could see where she was going. And if we understand that, she continued, we can allocate resources more effectively. She paused, watching my reaction carefully. I'm not trying to change what this is, she added quickly. I just want to help it last. That mattered. More than anything else she had said, because she wasn't trying to reshape it into something she recognized. She was trying to support what it already was. I nodded slowly. All right, I said. Show me. The shift in her expression was immediate. Not relief, not victory, but purpose. Real purpose. The kind she hadn't felt in weeks. Maybe longer. The rest of the day moved differently after that. Olivia worked alongside Marcus and Lila, asking questions, taking notes, observing patterns most people wouldn't notice. Not because they weren't there, but because they weren't looking for them. She saw inefficiencies. Small ones. Things that didn't disrupt the work, but could be improved. And instead of pointing them out as flaws, she approached them as opportunities. Could we group these by delivery zones, she asked at one point. It might save time on the routes. Marcus considered it, then nodded. Let's try it. No resistance, no ego, just collaboration. That's how things grow. Not through force, but through alignment. By late afternoon, the warehouse had taken on a slightly different rhythm. Still calm, still purposeful, but more fluid, more connected. And Olivia, she fit into it. Not perfectly, not yet, but naturally, like she had found a place she didn't know she was looking for. As the day wound down, she sat beside me near the back of the room, not working, just sitting. That was new for her too. I feel different, she said quietly. I glanced at her. How? She took a moment to answer. Lighter, she said, but not because things are easier. She looked down at her hands. Because I'm not carrying everything alone anymore. That was something she had never admitted before, not even to herself. I nodded. That's what happens when you shift focus, I said. You stop holding on to things that were never meant to be carried by one person. She let that settle. And I've been doing that my whole life, she said. Yes. She gave a small, almost self-aware smile. I thought that made me strong. It did, I said. Just not in the way you needed. She leaned back slightly, looking out across the warehouse. I used to think your life was small, she said. I didn't respond, because we had already been there. I was wrong, she continued. Not just about what you were doing, but about what matters. Her voice softened. I thought impact had to be visible, she said. But this, she gestured around us. This is invisible to most people. Yes? And it still changes everything. Yes. She nodded slowly. I don't think I've ever understood that before. I placed a hand gently over hers. You do now. And that was the turning point. Not the moment she saw the truth, but the moment she accepted it. Because understanding something intellectually is one thing. Living it, that's something else entirely. And my job, she said quietly. I waited. I thought losing it was the worst thing that could happen to me. She looked at me. But now, I'm not so sure. That was the twist she never expected. That what she saw as loss was actually space. Space to see differently, to feel differently, to choose differently. What if it wasn't a loss? I asked gently. She held my gaze. What if it was an invitation? The word stayed with her. I could see it, because for the first time, she wasn't trying to go back to who she was. She was starting to consider who she could become, and that changes everything. The first real change didn't come in the warehouse. It came outside of it. A week later, Olivia invited me to her apartment again. But this time, it felt different before I even arrived. When I stepped inside, I noticed it immediately. The space hadn't changed. The same clean lines, the same carefully arranged furniture, the same view stretching across the city. But the energy had softened. It no longer felt like a place meant to impress. It felt like a place someone was beginning to live in. Hey, she said as she opened the door. Her voice wasn't rushed this time, not distracted, just present. Hey, I replied, stepping inside. There were no guests, no background noise, no performance, just the two of us. I made dinner, she said almost hesitantly. That caught me off guard. Not because she couldn't cook, but because she never had time to. Or at least no background noise, no performance, just the two of us. I made dinner, she said almost hesitantly. That caught me off guard. Not because she couldn't cook, but because she never had time to. Or at least she had never made time. That smells good, I said honestly. She smiled a little unsure. We sat down together, and for the first time in years, there was no tension between us, no unspoken judgment, no distance we didn't know how to cross. Just quiet. But this time, it wasn't empty. It was shared. I've been thinking about what you said, Olivia began after a moment. About what? I asked. About this being an invitation. I nodded slightly, and I asked. She exhaled slowly. I think you're right. There was no resistance in her voice, no defensiveness, just acceptance. I spent so much time trying to get back to where I was, she continued, sending applications, reaching out, trying to rebuild the same life. She paused, looking down at her hands. But every time I thought about it, it didn't feel right anymore. That was important, because once something stops feeling right, you can't force it back into place. I don't think I want that life back, she said quietly. I studied her face carefully, not questioning, just listening. What do you want instead? I asked. She looked up at me, clarity in her eyes. I want something that matters the way that does, she said, referring to the work at the warehouse. Not louder, not bigger, but real. That word again. Real. I smiled softly. That's a good place to start. She leaned back slightly. But I don't know what that looks like yet, she admitted. You don't have to, I said. That surprised her. I don't know, I replied gently. You just have to keep moving in the direction that feels true. She let that sink in. Because for someone like Olivia, not having a clear plan was uncomfortable. But she was learning. Learning to sit in uncertainty. Learning to trust something other than control. There's something else, she said after a moment. I waited. I've been working on something, she added. That caught my attention. Oh. She stood up and walked over to her desk, picking up her laptop. Come here, she said. I joined her, watching as she opened a document. It wasn't polished. Not yet. But it was structured, thoughtful, intentional. I started mapping out the system, she explained. The way resources move, how families cycle through support where the pressure points are. I read through it slowly. She had seen things I hadn't fully articulated, connections that existed but hadn't been organized. This isn't about making it bigger, she said quickly. It's about making sure it can keep going. I looked at her, really looked, and for the first time, I saw not just my daughter, but someone who had found her place in something meaningful. This is good, I said. She let out a breath, almost like she had been holding it in. You think so? I saw not just my daughter, but someone who had found her place in something meaningful. This is good, I said. She let out a breath, almost like she had been holding it in. You think so, I know so. That mattered to her. I could tell, not because she needed validation, but because she respected what this place represented. I also reached out to a few people, she continued. That made me pause. What kind of people? Not investors, she said quickly. Nothing like that. She turned the screen slightly, showing me a list. People who understand logistics, distribution, quiet support networks. I scanned the names. They weren't public figures. They weren't flashy. They were people who worked behind the scenes, just like us. They don't know everything, she added, just enough to help strengthen what's already there. That was the key. She wasn't exposing the network. She was protecting it while helping it grow in the right way. You've been busy, I said. She smiled faintly. For the first time in weeks, I don't feel lost. That hit me deeper than anything else she had said, because that was what this was really about. Not the work, not the system, but her finding her way again. And your job? I asked gently. She shook her head. I turned down 2 offers. I raised an eyebrow slightly. Really? They were exactly what I used to want, she said. Same environment, same expectations. She paused, but they didn't feel right anymore. I nodded. Because once your perspective shifts, your choices follow. I'm not saying I'll never go back to that world, she added, but if I do, it won't be the same. That's how it works, I said. She closed the laptop slowly. I used to think success meant being seen, she said. I didn't interrupt. But now, she continued, I think it means knowing what you're doing matters, even if no one else sees it. I smiled. Now you understand. She looked at me, her expression softer than I had ever seen it. I think I'm starting to. We sat there in silence for a moment, but it wasn't the silence we used to have. It wasn't filled with things unsaid. It was complete. I'm sorry, she said suddenly. I turned to her. For what? For all of it, she said. For how I saw you. For what I said. For what I didn't take the time to understand. Her voice didn't shake, but it carried weight. Real weight. I reached out, taking her hand. You don't need to apologize, I said gently. Yes, I do, she insisted softly. I held her gaze. Then I accept, I said. That was all she needed. Not forgiveness, but acknowledgement. We sat there a little longer, the city lights beginning to glow outside the window. And for the first time, that apartment didn't feel like a symbol of distance. It felt like a place where something had been repaired. Not perfectly, but honestly. And that's what matters. Because healing isn't about erasing what happened. It's about understanding it, growing from it, and choosing something better moving forward. Olivia had lost something. Her job, her certainty, her sense of control. But in that loss, she had found something far more important. Perspective, purpose, and a connection she didn't realize she had been missing all along. And as I sat there beside her, I knew something with absolute certainty. She wasn't the same person anymore, and she never would be again. The real test didn't come from the work. It came from the world Olivia had once belonged to. 2 weeks after she started helping regularly, she received a call. I knew something had shifted the moment I saw her face that afternoon at the warehouse. She wasn't panicked, but she wasn't calm either. She was conflicted. What is it? I asked quietly as she set her bag down. She hesitated before answering. I got an offer, she said. I nodded slowly. That's not surprising. She let out a small breath. It's a senior position, she continued. Better than position, she continued. Better than what I had before. That caught my attention. Better how more responsibility, more visibility, more influence. The words sounded familiar, like echoes from a life she had spent years chasing. And how do you feel about it, what I had before? That caught my attention. Better how more responsibility, more visibility, more influence. The words sounded familiar, like echoes from a life she had spent years chasing. And how do you feel about it? I asked. She didn't answer right away, because this wasn't a simple question. It's everything I used to want, she said finally. Used to. That word mattered. But, I asked gently. She looked around the warehouse, at the people, at the quiet movement, at the work being done without recognition. I don't know if it's everything I need anymore, she admitted. There it was, the conflict. Not between good and bad, but between two different versions of herself. One that was familiar, and one that was still forming. They want an answer by tomorrow, she added. I nodded. Then you should take tonight. She gave a small, almost nervous smile. That's not how I usually make decisions. I know, I said, but this isn't a usual decision. That stayed with her. I didn't offer advice, didn't tell her what to do, because this choice had to be hers. That evening, she didn't go home right away. She stayed, helping where she could. But I could see her mind working. We all could. Even Marcus noticed. Big decision, he asked her at one point. She nodded. Yeah. He didn't press, just gave a small nod and went back to his work. Because here, people didn't tell you who to be. They let you figure it out. Later that night, after most of the volunteers had left, Olivia and I sat together in the quiet of the warehouse, the same place where everything had started to shift for her. I used to think decisions like this were easy, she said. How so? I asked. You choose the option that gives you more, she said. More what? More success, more recognition, more growth. I nodded. And now? She looked around again, taking it all in. I think I was measuring the wrong things, she said softly. That was the truth she had been moving toward this entire time. And what are you measuring now? I asked. She took a deep breath. Impact, she said. Not loudly, not dramatically, just clearly. I smiled. Then the answer might already be there. She let out a quiet laugh. Nothing about this feels simple. It's not supposed to, I said. Simple decisions don't change who you are. That stayed with her. We sat in silence for a while after that, but it wasn't heavy. It was reflective. Eventually, she stood up. I think I know what I need to do, she said. I didn't ask, because I trusted her. The next morning, she made the call. She turned the offer down, not because it was wrong, but because it wasn't right for who she was becoming. When she told me later that day, there was no regret in her voice, only clarity. I thought I'd feel scared, she admitted, but I don't. What do you feel? I asked. Certain, she said. That was all I needed to hear. Over the next few months, things changed. Not overnight, not dramatically, but steadily. Olivia became a permanent part of the work, not as someone replacing what existed, but as someone strengthening it. Her systems made things smoother. Her insight helped us reach people we might have missed. Her presence brought a different kind of energy, and the network grew. Not in size alone, but in depth, in stability, in impact. More families were reached. More lives were touched. And still, no one outside of it really knew. Just the way it was meant to be. One evening, as we were finishing up for the day, Olivia stood beside me watching as the last of the deliveries went out. Do you ever wish people knew? She asked suddenly. I looked at her. About all of this. She nodded. I considered the question. Not quickly, but honestly. No, I said. She tilted her head slightly. Why not? Because the people who need to know already do. I replied. She let that settle, and then she smiled. Not the confident smile she used to give in meetings, not the polite one she used in social settings, but something real, something grounded. I get it now, she said. I know. We stood there a little longer watching the van disappear down the street, and I realized something in that moment. This wasn't just about her finding purpose or changing direction. It was about connection, understanding, and the quiet ways people can transform when they're willing to see beyond themselves. My life used to be so loud, she said. And now? She looked around. At first I thought this was quiet, she said. But it's not. I smiled. No, I agreed. It's just not noisy. She nodded. And I think I like it better this way. That was the ending she never expected. Not a return to what she had, not a dramatic reinvention, but a quiet shift. A deeper understanding, a different kind of success, one that didn't need to be announced, only lived. And as we turned off the lights and stepped out into the evening, I knew something for certain. She would never look at a quiet life the same way again. Because now she understood exactly how powerful it could be. After everything that happened, one truth stands out clearly. We often misunderstand what a meaningful life really looks like. We're taught to chase recognition, success, and visibility as if being seen is the only proof that our lives matter. But this story shows something different. Real impact doesn't always come with applause. Sometimes the most powerful contributions are the ones made quietly, consistently, and without anyone noticing. Olivia's journey reminds us that losing something we value can actually create space for something better. What feels like failure can become an invitation, an opportunity to rethink our priorities, reconnect with what truly matters, and redefine success on our own terms. And sometimes the people we misunderstand the most are the ones who are quietly making the biggest difference. If this story made you reflect on your own life, I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever misjudged someone's path only to realize later how meaningful it was? Or have you experienced a moment where everything you thought mattered suddenly changed? Share your thoughts in the comments and tell me where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Your story might inspire someone else more than you realize. And if this message resonated with you, don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories like this. Stories that remind us what truly matters in the end.